As teachers, we spend quite a bit of time grading and thinking about what to grade and what not to grade. It's so important that we really do think this through, though, because there are certain mistakes that we can make that can really actually demotivate our students. So let's dive in and talk about how we can set up our grading and our weighting to really benefit our students and encourage them rather than discourage them. Well, welcome back to the Teach for the Heart podcast, where we tackle teaching challenges from a biblical perspective. Why are we here? Because we don't believe our spiritual walk and teaching profession should exist in two separate domains. Rather, the hope we have in Christ should change how we approach everything, not just at home, but at school as well. So join us as we explore both the spiritual and practical sides of key teaching challenges, integrating them together so we can succeed at teaching, glorify God, and make a lasting difference in our students' hearts and lives. This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. I'm so excited to be joined once again by Ashley, one of our team members and Teach for the Heart Plus mentors. Ashley, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So we're going to be talking about grading mistakes that we can make as teachers that can really demotivate our students. But on the plus side, if we fix them, can really be helpful for our students and to give us an accurate reflection of what the students are actually learning. And just as a quick explanation, when I say grading mistakes, I'm not talking about how when we grade, we're all going to make mistakes. We mark an answer wrong that should be right. We miss one that should be wrong. That's part of life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking more about when we think about what to grade and how we grade it and how we weight it and how many points things are worth. Are we doing that in a way that's an accurate reflection, or are we doing some things that are inadvertently discouraging students or for frustrating them? So it can be so easy for us, I think, to make some kind of these key grading mistakes. And one of the things that's so important, though, as we think about real quick from just a higher level perspective, is how can we make grading an accurate reflection of what students are learning? When we think about our grade book, the specific grades we put in it, how we weight different categories, I really think that is one of the key things, is how is this an accurate reflection? And are the numbers that are kind of coming out of these formulas are they accurately reflecting? And are they reflecting how the student is growing over the course of the quarter, or not growing over the course of the quarter? What would you say about that, Ashley?
So as an English teacher, this is something that, because English can be subjective, depending on how you grade it. And so it can be really tricky. And so I think that just taking the time to sit and think, what does this grade reflect? And even just if you open your grade book and scan through it, can you tell me what that assignment shows mastery of? Can you tell me what the C on that assignment shows for that student? Or is it just show he did a C job on it? Like making sure that we can actually speak to what the assignments we're grading are showing about our students' mastery of our subject is so important.
Yes, absolutely. So there's so much we could say on this, but we're going to kind of arrange it by talking about some mistakes, some things that we want to avoid. And obviously, then we'll also talk about what to do instead. So the first mistake we have on our list is testing or assessing material that you didn't emphasize in class. So one way that this can look is if you have maybe a test that comes with your curriculum. And so it's like, great, I have this test. But then when you're teaching, you're not necessarily focusing on the things that the material that the curriculum focused on, or that the test focused on. So what you did in class, and then when the students sit down to take the test, it's like, okay, but some of this stuff might be hard. Like this was hardly mentioned. And so we shouldn't just say, oh, well, it's in the textbook. I just told them to study the textbook. If what you're testing on the test is not what you emphasized in class, you're creating a disconnect, and you're teaching your students that, yeah, I don't really need to listen in class because it's not on the test anyhow. And it doesn't really matter how hard I try in class because it's not really going to help me on the test. And we do not want that's very demotivating and also unfair. And so we do not want that. So I would say, for me, the way I dealt with this is I did not use the pre-made tests. I knew what I emphasized. I knew what was important. And so I made my own tests. But that's not the only way to do it. If you want to use their test, though, you need to look through it and go, okay, what is emphasized? And I'm not talking about teaching to the test, not at all, but just aligning. What am I assessing? If this is what's important to assess, I need to teach this. And if this is not what's important to assess, then I need to change the assessment.
I'm so glad that you started with that, because that's one of my biggest pet peeves. And I know it's one of the students it's what I hear students complain about the most. They didn't talk about that. And then they're like, someone will say, well, it was on the study guide. Well, that's even frustrating for a student to be forced to study something for the first time that wasn't taught in class. It can be really discouraging. And I think students don't understand. So, and even if you do want to use a pre-made test, that's fine, but make sure you reread it every time you teach it, right? So if you're recycling a test from last year, because I've found like, oh, I emphasized something different in this unit than I did 2 years ago when I taught it, or 1 year ago when I taught it. And so then you might have to adjust and delete, even if it's a test you wrote, delete questions. Oh, we really didn't end up talking about puns that much in Romeo and Juliet this year. We just didn't emphasize it. I emphasized other things. Delete that, add a new question that really focuses more on what you did talk about. And then that's, I think, just a really important part of you saying, I taught this, what did you learn? And so then that number means something versus I taught a generally something related to this.
Exactly. Okay, yes. I love that. So, number one, do not test over material that you didn't emphasize in class. Make sure what you are emphasizing matches, because you should be emphasizing what's important and you should be testing what's important. So, I'm going to give a little 1A. Don't ask little baby details on the task. Maybe a bonus that can be fun, but like test over what matters, test over what's important. Don't test over minutia and trivia. Okay, that's just 1A. Number two mistake, testing before students are ready. So just if the majority of the class is still confused about the topic, or they don't really know it, or they're not really getting it, it is not fair to just give them a test because we got to get this test in. We need to make sure that the majority of the class understands what we're doing before we give, I'm talking about like a test assessment. I'm not talking about formative assessments or those along the way. I'm talking like the test over this material. They need to be ready for it. Now, I'm not please hear me. There is responsibility for the students to study and prepare. Okay. If they didn't put in their time studying, that is on them. But if we didn't make sure that they understand the material in class, that is on us. And I think a good cue is like, what percentage of my students get this concept? Not necessarily what percentage of my students put in the time to memorize what they need to memorize, but the concepts. Are they getting the concepts? This is especially true, I think, in math, science, or things where it's like you need to grasp these concepts. If the majority of the class, or like half the class, or even a third of the class is clearly still confused, then we haven't taught it well enough yet to test them on it.
Absolutely. I second that.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. America turns 250 years old next summer, and as we approach this incredible milestone, the Herzog Foundation is launching the Freedom Tour, a national event series celebrating the history and hope of America. It's a powerful reminder that our freedoms, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, aren't government-made, they're God-given. The Freedom Tour invites you to experience how faith shaped our founding and to carry that message into your classrooms, homes, and communities. But that's not all. Starting this summer, the Herzog Foundation is also releasing a new video series called Faith and Freedom 250. Every Friday, you'll hear voices from across America, teachers, parents, pastors, and leaders sharing powerful stories from our nation's history and reminding us why our founding values still matter today. Learn more and follow along at freedomtour250.com. That's freedomtour250.com. Now, back to the conversation. I think one of the things that we could talk about real quick too here, though, is there is a difference between grading to assess and needing to give feedback, right? So there's many things along the way where, the test at the end typically is like, okay, I want to assess what they learned, right? It's grading for that score. But there's a lot of points along the way where we're like, well, I need to see how they're doing. And we do these intermediate assessments, and those are different. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ashley?
Yeah, actually, this is one of my soapbox things that I really am really passionate about. I read a year or two ago a book called Flash Feedback. I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but it was really, really helpful for me as an English teacher, especially because he specifically talked about this, like saying, it's two different things to give a grade that actually assesses versus giving a student feedback. And this is why, especially as an English teacher, but all teachers, grading is so time consuming because very often you're doing two things at once. You're trying to give feedback and assess. And so he talked about splitting those and being really aware of, this is an assignment where my focus is to give feedback versus this is an assignment that I'm actually assessing. And they don't always have to be separate, but just at least having that awareness of when am I trying to give them the feedback. And also keeping in mind, are you giving the feedback on a test that's already done that they can't retake, that there's nothing they can do about? That's discouraging. Speaking of demotivating, by the way, here's everything you did wrong. Well, that would have been really helpful to know before I took this test. So like being aware of giving them enough feedback to prepare them so that then this is where the student responsibility then does come in. If you've given them feedback, no, Bobby, that's not right for XYZ. You're using the formula wrong, or you're not understanding this concept correctly. And if you've given Bobby all that feedback and he has just like ignored it and gets to the test, and then you're assessing him and Bobby doesn't do well, then that's really on Bobby. But at least you can follow the trail of I gave you feedback and I told you where you were getting it wrong. And I sat in front of you and we talked about it. And I gave you a quiz and told you on the quiz why you were getting this wrong. And so then the test really is a true assessment of Bobby's effort. And you know that you did your work as a teacher to get him where he needed to be.
Such a good point, Ashley, and that's super, super helpful. So far we talked number one, mistake, testing over material that you didn't emphasize in class. Number two, testing before students are ready, and going along with that kind of confusing formative and feedback with that final assessment. Number three, we're going to start getting into a few other things that kind of do with a little bit of math, so don't get scared. Number three, though, asking too few questions. So I think one of my pet peeves, and I think this really bothers students too, is when you have like a 3-question quiz, a 5-question quiz. If you have a 3-question quiz and someone misses one question and you give them a 2 out of 3, that is 67%. So I don't know what your grading scale is, but for most that's a D. Some it's an even an F for missing one question. If they miss 2 questions, they now have a 33%. 5-question isn't a ton better, right? -1's an 80, -2's a 60. So just thinking like those, that I'm not saying you can never ever do that, but just be careful about that. Use that sparingly. Once again, maybe that's not a grade. Maybe that's just like that formative assessment or that feedback type thing. I'm just trying to see how you're doing, but just recognizing students can get really frustrated because they see those low grades over just, 1 or 2 things that they didn't know. So you can, in some cases, you just need to ask more questions. You need to give them 2, or in some cases, you need to curve it. So for example, I'll tell you something that I did when I was teaching math. I gave homework, and at some point I didn't grade it, but at some point I was like, I want to grade this because students weren't taking it seriously. And I normally gave about 6 or 7 problems, but I did not feel like it was fair to give them, to actually give them like, if they missed half the problems, I didn't want to give them an F because the point was to practice and to work on it. So what I did was I counted each problem as -5. So if they missed 1, it was 95, 2, 90, 3, 85, And so if they had 6 problems and they missed them all, they still got a 70 as long as they made an effort, as long as I could see an honest effort and them actually working and showing their work and really trying each problem. The worst they could get was a 70. And the reason I did it that way was because, like, again, I didn't feel like that was fair. And I just thought I felt like that was an accurate reflection of what I wanted, and the combination of I just want effort, but yet if you get them all wrong, you really shouldn't get 100. But I didn't want you to get a 0 either. So I guess I'm kind of combining 2 mistakes here, but I think too few questions is something to definitely be aware of. But the bigger thing here is just thinking through, once again, is this number an accurate reflection? If they miss 1 point and get a 67, is that really accurate? Or should I give them, maybe count them 10 points each? Just kind of thinking through, what am I trying to do here? And is the number that results an accurate reflection? And if not, you can adjust it. Make a scale that is an accurate reflection of what you're trying to do.
I love that idea. I've never thought of just making the questions like that point value so that like completion still factors in, but you're not solely giving a completion grade. It's not you did all of it, you get 100. But then also keeping in mind like how like, okay, but you got it wrong. So let's deduct just this like -5. I absolutely love that idea actually. So that's really interesting.
Very cool. Yeah, I really ended up happy with that system, and I adapted it in different ways just for different assignments. It really worked out. But once again, giving yourself that freedom and that intentionality, I think is really a key word when we think about grading and weighting. So we're going to get into more grades weighting in a second, but this one's a little bit simpler. Now, grading mistake number 4, giving 1 grade to a whole group on a group project. I'm not going to say never do this, but group projects are tricky because you typically have a combination of really strong students, you've got a mixture of strong students, weak students, students that did a lot of work for the project, students that did hardly any work for the project. And it can be very frustrating, particularly to your good students if they know their grade is dependent on stuff that they can't control. And it also can be honestly demotivating for your lower students if they're just like, I don't have to do anything. These good kids will carry the grade. So Ashley, I don't know if you have thoughts on this, but one thing you can do is you can give, once again, make your grade a combo grade. There might be a score for the final product that is only a percentage of the score, and then a larger percentage of the score is that person's individual part. What did they do gets scored separately from the entire project, and then they get put together so that the end is largely influenced by the individual work, not just the whole component.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it really short, but I use group work mainly for formative stuff so that it isn't a set. I would rarely, if ever, use it for some type of actual formal assessment. But formative is great because then they are getting support from their peers. I'm always very clear with them about how they're being graded, so to alleviate concern, so that they know that their grade isn't dependent on the other person, both to motivate the lower students and then also help calm down the higher students. And then I do tend to like to assign parts. So like say like you pick a part, whether that's, everybody writes in a different colored marker or whatever it is, but a way so that I'm actually assessing that individual student still only individually, even if it's a group thing that they're doing together.
Oh, I love that idea of having different colors. That's fantastic. A great way to do that. Um, that's obviously could be a whole topic of itself, but definitely just think once again that intentionality and thinking this through and thinking it through from the different perspectives. And I'm like, if I am grading this, or do I just want to use this more formatively? I love that. Mistake number 5 is having too few grades in the grade book for the quarter. Oh my goodness. I see this all the time. This is a really, really common mistake. And I know it can be hard. There's so much going on, especially elementary teachers. You have so many different subjects, but you've really got to watch your grade book. If you don't have at least, I would say, a minimum of 10 grades in the grade book at the end of the quarter, that is not an accurate reflection. I've seen grade books with like 3 or 4 grades, and that is not fair to a student. They get one bad grade, they are sunk. And you got your good students that are really trying for the A's, and there's just no way to make that up. And it's not an accurate reflection if it's just 1 or 2 things. You don't know if someone had an off day, a good day, and so you have to have at least a minimum. And that 10 still makes me really nervous, to be honest, but I know in certain subjects you only have so much, but you have to have a minimum number of grades in the grade book. If you don't, it's not fair to them. It does not give them an accurate chance, and it's just not going to be an accurate reflection because it's really only these couple high points or low points instead of being enough throughout the quarter. And if you're like, I can't get them, I recommend talk to someone in your school, because there are ways to get these grades. Like, it does not have to be a ton more tests, or there are definitely a ton of ways that you can get some more grades in the grade book.
Yeah. I think keeping in mind the intention behind grades is to give you information as a teacher. And so you should be gathering that information much more frequently. And then also grades also communicate to the student. So if you're only communicating to the student 3 to 4 times how they're doing, that can be very demotivating, or confusing, or they just don't know. I don't know how I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I said 10, I'm thinking basically like 1 a week, right? At least something every week. It leaves you with 9 or 10, by the end of the quarter.
Exactly.
So number 5, too few grades in the grade book. Number 6, okay, we're going to get a little bit of math, but we can do this. Not enough grades in a particular category so that weighting is skewed. I could go on a whole thing about weighting, but for here, we're just talking about, how a lot of times, and this is not the only way to set up a grade book, and it's not even necessarily the way I would recommend it, but it's super common to weight categories. So this is not a recommended example. This is literally just an example. Tests are 40%, quizzes are 30%, homework's 20%, classwork's 10%. You have those broad categories. But what can happen is sometimes, if within a particular category you only have 1 or 2 grades, that one grade can get weighted way out of proportion. So let me give you an example. Let's say that tests are 40% of your grade, and that you want them to be a big, like, test. You're like, these are the big tests, they're important, 40%. And let's say you give 3 tests throughout the quarter. So each one is roughly then like 13% of their final grade. Does that make sense? 40% divided by 3. So it's 13% each. That's appropriate for a test. Let's say then you have quizzes are 30%, but you actually don't give a lot of quizzes. It just didn't work out that quarter. Let's say you only give 1 quiz. I've seen this. You have 1 quiz for the quarter. Well, do you know how much that 1 quiz is worth? It's worth the full 30% of their grade. And that is not what you meant to do, I don't think. You did not mean for this one quiz to be 30% of their final grade. But it is, because it's the only one in the category, or there's only two in that category. So that those one or two quizzes ended up being worth more than the tests, because it wasn't right. So just recommend kind of looking at that, looking how many grades, and that simple formula of the percentage of the category divided by how many grades are in the category shows you how much each particular thing is worth. And if you're like, my mind is glazing over, I don't like those numbers, I highly recommend get someone in your school that's good with numbers to just look over your grade book. They could in just a few minutes say, hey, do you realize this is doing this, and do you realize this is doing that? And once again, it's just not good. Ashley, you mentioned sometimes you having teachers say like, man, I put in one grade and it affected the grade this much. Is that a problem?
Yeah.
It's like, yes, this is a weighting issue.
Yeah, exactly. And even keeping in mind, keeping in mind your weights, but even keeping in mind the point values you're assigning to things. Like, they shouldn't be arbitrary. It shouldn't be like, I think the final is going to be 150 points this year. It's like, well, so then how does that impact all the other things in that same category? Because that also, I'm not a math teacher, so correct me if I'm wrong, Linda, but I'm pretty sure that also equally will disproportionately weight that one assignment, even within that same category, if the point value is just arbitrarily huge. And if it is worth that much for work or effort or what it's showing, great. But like, just being aware of that, not just throwing out random numbers for what stuff is worth.
Yes, that is super important. And I'm not going to get too much into the math of that, because it depends on how your software is set up. Some software takes all of them and averages them evenly. Other ones do it according to the point value. So yeah, 150 points is worth, 3 times a 50 point. So I think what's really important is that you understand what the numbers in your gradebook are doing. And I know that can sound scary, but if that does sound scary to you, I want to really encourage you, like I said, to get with someone in your school that does. It's really worth it. You're really doing a disservice to your students if you don't really understand what your weighting is doing. Then you're giving these numbers kind of arbitrarily, and if you don't understand how your weighting is working, I can almost guarantee you're doing something unfairly. If this is just something that you're just like, it's too overwhelming. So that best advice I can give is, if it overwhelms you, like I said, talk to someone else, get their help. They'll be able to really help you with it. And if you're like, no, I do understand the numbers, I just hadn't really thought about it, then I just want to encourage you to think about it. Go in there and look and just say, yeah, what are these numbers doing? And also pay attention, like you were mentioning, Ashley, about if you pay attention, if you put a grade in and it's like, notice how big of a difference it makes, and ask yourself, is that accurate? Is that fair? Now, obviously, in the beginning of the quarter, they're going to make bigger differences because you only have a few grades. But especially as you go along, ask yourself, do I feel like these are fair representations of my students' grades? And if not, start asking those questions. Is it because am I weighting these things the right amount? Am I giving them the right number of points? These things can kind of these are the questions to ask. And there's not one size fits all answer. The best way to weight it is the way that is an accurate reflection, and it's based on what you are doing and what you believe too. So I'll just say one more thing. When you think of like tests, how much is a test worth versus formative assessment versus participation, there's not one magical formula for that. It really does depend on what you believe is important for your class. For math, I believe that can you actually do the math was very important, and so tests and quizzes were weighted more, but I also gave partial credit. So in other words, if for each question, if they got it 95% right and they just added wrong at the end, well, they got 95% of the credit for that credit. So I really felt like I was giving them all of their points. Anyhow, my point is, I thought that through. I have other teachers that are like, no, like their participation is so important. That's the number one thing in this class because we're reading and we're practicing, and I just need them to really make sure that they're doing the work. And that's really an important piece. And so that's a bigger percentage than it is in another class. So once again, I just think it's about thinking through and being intentional and making the numbers work to match what is important to you and for your class and your age and all of that.
And I think that it's okay to talk to the kids about this too. Like, it's okay to be really transparent about how you're grading and why you're doing it that way. That gives them confidence in you, and it gives them confidence and understanding of their grade. And I've even done things before like, well, guys, I gave you guys that quiz. Got to be honest, we didn't do super well at it. And I kind of feel like it's not an accurate representation, or it shows me that I need to teach you. So I just threw that quiz out. I didn't even put it, so like things like that can inspire confidence in you. Like, your students feel like you're aware of how the grades impact them, and you're not just throwing numbers at them and without caring about them.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Such a good point. Talking with them and yeah, being willing to say, well, this was not an accurate reflection. Sometimes it is. Sometimes those tough grades need to go in the grade book, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's like, yep, oops, yep, we all learned from this and we're just going to move on. That's great. Ashley, any other final thoughts or things you want to share before we wrap this one up?
Nope, I think that I learned a lot from this. So thank you so much for all of those ideas.
And thank you guys so much for listening to this one. I know this is kind of one that's been in my mind for so long, but I know it's such a like a little bit of a niche topic, but I think because we don't talk about it a lot, but I think it is so important. And I applaud all of you guys that got through to the end, and I encourage you to just keep listening on it. It really is a valuable thing to think about with your students. And if you want, whether you want to talk about this topic or another topic, if you're not in our Facebook group, we have a phenomenal Facebook group of Christian educators that just go in there and talk about everything. So that's another place you could go in, ask for some advice, share what your questions or your thoughts. That'd be a great place. But we'd love to invite you, whether you want to talk about this topic or any topic. You can go to teachfortheheart.com/Facebook and follow the links to join our amazing Facebook group. This episode has been brought to you in partnership with the Herzog Foundation. All views and opinions are our own and don't necessarily reflect those of the Herzog Foundation. If you did enjoy this episode, we encourage you to share the podcast with a friend or colleague. You can also leave a review, comments. All those things are super helpful. Well, thank you for being with us. We look forward to speaking with you again soon. In the meantime, teacher, remember, God is at work in you and through you, and He's using you to make a difference. Keep your eyes on Him and teach for the heart.